which is in order: James McQueen Sr., Stephen Patton, Richard Bibby, John Goff, and Robert Kelly. So Mr. McQueen, please start.
Just a second, I'm starting my video.
Hello?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak today. I'm James McQueen, Southern Maryland captain for its Convention of States. I was born at Bethesda Naval Hospital and my home is in Calvert County. I'm here to testify for over 2,200 Southern Maryland COS petitioners and the rest of our Maryland citizens. I need to talk about how the federal government infringes on the rights of every state and American citizen. One example is the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion amount of debt to help Americans recover from COVID-19. Also, don't forget the previous $4 trillion in funds for COVID-19 vaccine, small business relief, direct payments to individuals, pork, and etc. The new American Rescue Plan has only designated 9% directly related to COVID-19. 91% is for the expansion of more uncontrolled programs, pork, and unrelated policy changes. And already on a daily basis, the federal government ships skids of $100 bills to other countries. What happens when the citizens can't afford to pay the debt? Who suffers? Not the millionaires in Congress. We do as seniors, our kids, grandkids, are all stuck in an uncontrollable situation of higher taxes and inflation. Now it's time for Maryland to take the power back and use Article 5 of the Constitution to call a convention of states, impose federal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits on Congress and federal officials. We need to secure the future for all Marylanders and American citizens. Thank you for your yes vote on HJ6.
Thank you very much. Stephen Patton. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Awesome. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Steve Patton. Maryland is my home. I have the honor of being the state director of an all-volunteer organization that boasts more than 22,000 supporters here in Maryland. More than 5,000 of those supporters have joined our movement in the past year. We are growing quickly. I'd like to address a reason why we are growing at such a rapid rate. The falsehoods that have been swirling around the Article 5 Convention of States process have been debunked. Yep, debunked. You've heard these objections before. Let's take a quick look at each and the truth behind the myth. First, how do we know how a convention of states will work? Interstate conventions were common during the founding era, and the basic procedures and rules for such conventions were uniform. The historical precedent is plentiful. One just needs to look. Second, the federal government ignores the Constitution now. Why would the federal government adhere to an amended Constitution? Federal officials don't ignore the Constitution so much as they lawyer around it. This is not the Constitution our federal government is following. This is the Constitution they are following. This is the U.S. Constitution Analysis and Interpretation. It is 3,000 pages, weighs over 10 pounds, and serves as the legal authority for everything that the federal government does. The third objection I want to address, the Runaway Convention, also referred to as a con-con. This entire objection is based in the U.S. Constitution having been illegally adopted. The runaway myth reasoning argues that delegates to the Constitutional Convention disobeyed their instructions and that the ratification process was improperly changed. Both of these assertions have been proven false. Again, one just needs to look. We are not here to debate on the merits and objections of an Article 5 Convention of the States. However, I strongly contend there is more than sufficient cause to allow such a debate, and this is why I ask that the members of this committee find HJ6 as favorable so this discussion can move forward. I thank you for your time today and your service to our state.
Thank you very much. Next is Richard Bibby. Mr. Bibby, you're muted. Can you, there you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Hi.
Yes.
Very good. Fellow Marylanders, I am Rick Bibby in Leitersburg, Maryland. resident and a graduate of the bicentennial class of 1976 from the Parkersburg South High School Patriots. I've been a resident in Washington County since 1991 and a homeowner since 1996, and have American roots dating back to 1620. It is with that in mind that today I rise for myself and over 900 petition signers from District 2 to address those that would object to an Article 5 Convention of States being held. Some will say that we'll be unleashing a Pandora's box upon the country that will destroy everything that has long been held sacred. We stand against that claim, believing that our founders built this Article 5 method that allows for corrections to our future navigation as a bipartisan lifeline to save us from the selfish judgments and stalemated partisanships of the past. If I still believed in my heart of hearts that our elected U.S. and House Senate members would make these changes all on their own, I'd not be here today. But I felt an urgent call for my voice to be heard. That same call was once answered in 1776 by 56 regular citizens with an average age of just 45, of which 2 of those were self-educated men, 1 a cobbler and 1 a carpenter. None of those 56 could ever have been called a statesman, yet they found the courage to believe in something bigger than themselves. We now owe the same to the future generations of Americans to use the founders' tools to make the adjustments needed to allow this great experiment in a government of, by, and for the people to live on forever. Our nation needs us now. My simple theory of life is a simple one. It's 1 + 1 = 3. It's not what I do, nor what you do, but when we do it together, we can change the world. And your bipartisan part in saving the country starts right here, right now, by simply voting with the growing groundswell of concerned Marylanders statewide to approve HJ6. Thank you to you and all the hundreds that are watching us on screen right now. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. John Goff.
Good morning. Hear me okay, ma'am?
Thank you. Okay, your name on there is Dave. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. First name John, middle name Dave. Go by Dave.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. Thank you for your service to the citizens of the state of Maryland, and thank you for this time to speak with you this morning. As we just discussed, my name is Dave Goff. I'm a lifetime resident of Maryland, and I've participated in every election at any level in our state that I was able to. Additionally, I'm a retired state law enforcement with 30 years experience who appreciates law and order as well as the rule of law. This is why HJ6 appeals to me. It's the legal process for the citizens to utilize the right granted them by the Creator and memorialized in the Constitution to bring the change at the federal level that our elected and appointed officials choose not to. I believe that our federally elected and appointed officials need term limits that they refuse to pose upon themselves. In a poll conducted by McLaughlin and Associates released in February of 21, 89% of those polled were in favor of term limits for members of Congress and 59% in favor of term limits for Supreme Court justices. I believe a regular purge of sitting legislators is essential to promote new ideas and reduce corruption. The founders of this great country never intended for the federal government to be as large as it is or have the amount of power that it does. That right was reserved for us, the states. Those federal elected positions were never meant to be full-time careers. This country cannot move forward on the stale ideas of politicians embedded in their positions for 40+ years. I also fear that anyone who holds a position of great power for extended periods becomes more susceptible to corruption. Even the federal prison system understands this issue and requires prison employees to be moved within the system every 3 years to deter abuses of power. Please give HJ6 the time it deserves and the opportunity to be debated on the floor. Thank you. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. Robert Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Robert Kelly. I'm here as General Counsel for Convention of States Action. We are a nationwide grassroots nonprofit organization that has over 4.8 million supporters across the country, many of whom you've just heard from here in the state. I don't really think I can improve upon the testimony that they've already given, other than just to emphasize that this piece of legislation is one that enjoys bipartisan support across this country. Majorities of both Republicans and Democrats support this piece of legislation in every state where it's being run. It's currently being run in 20 other states right now, and it has passed in 15 states across this country. The purpose of this legislation is to give people a seat at the table and to be able to speak to their politicians in Washington, D.C. Majorities of both Republicans and Democrats believe that you as state legislatures do a better job representing them than their congressional representatives up in Washington, D.C. And really, that should be no surprise since you are closer to the people that you represent. I encourage all of you to adopt this, to pass this resolution out of committee and to support the will of your constituents here in the state. With that, I open it up to any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this group? I see a hand raised by Delegate McComas.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Mr. Kelly or Mr. Patton. Okay. This is a national effort. What states have signed on to this at this point? I think that was mentioned. For this group, states have passed it.
Sure. Yes, Delegate McComas, I'm happy to list out the states. This has been adopted in 15 states so far. Those states are Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Utah, and Tennessee, as well as Texas.
Thank you. The other question I have is, okay, there's been a real concern over the years that an Article 5 convention would not be limited. And as basically, I think there's a concern that we would literally upend and rewrite the Constitution. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think there's no substantial risk of a convention running away or somehow rewriting the Constitution. This application here invokes the article, the legislative authority that this legislature has under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. And Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution specifically says that the legislature has the ability to apply for a convention for proposing amendments. And I think both of those words are critically important to understand. First, the convention only has the ability to propose. That is to say, it's essentially a drafting committee. It can come up with a proposal for limiting the power of the federal government, a proposal for term limits on members of Congress, a proposal for fiscal restraints on the federal government. But what it cannot do is enact any of that. Article 5 explicitly states that 3/4 of the states are required to ratify any proposal that comes out of the convention, which is exactly the same requirement that is imposed on Congress itself. And of course, this is an incredibly high burden. It means merely one house in 13 states could defeat any proposal. So the only kind of proposal that you're ever going to see successfully come out of a convention is one that enjoys overwhelming bipartisan support of the American people. Something like term limits that consistently enjoys 80 to 90%, something like a balanced budget amendment, or something that restrains the ability of the federal government to spend above the revenue that it generates, that enjoys consistently 60 to 70% of the American people, and something that curtails federal abuses of powers in other areas. 67% of the American people believe the federal government is too large and tries to do too much. So those are the types of areas that amendments could reasonably be adopted on. There's no realistic chance of an amendment being adopted in another area.
So let me just, so the mechanics would be that the convention of this, who would select, basically walk through the mechanics of it, like who gets chosen to go to the convention, where was the convention held, and then after the list of bills have been drafted, or the issues have been drafted and submitted to the different legislatures, both houses would have to approve the bill, and then it would be given to the governor to sign it, or what they, in other words, what they approved, the agenda items that they approved. In other words, walk me through the process after the agenda of the Convention of the States has been formalized and drafted to go.
Sure. Certainly, Delegate McComas. So the process begins with the state legislatures adopting resolutions, which do not need to be presented to the governor for signature. Article 5 states that once 2/3 of the states have applied for a convention, then Congress has to call the convention. The convention then takes place. The delegates are appointed by the states according to whatever process they've adopted. That could be the legislatures themselves electing the delegates. That could be the legislatures delegating that authority to the governor of the state, or some combination thereof, perhaps the Speaker of the House or the governor, or some committee that's appointed for that purpose. That is up to the states themselves to adopt procedures for. The convention meets. The delegates are limited to debating on the topics that have been specified in the applications by the states, and then they propose out amendments. Once those amendments are proposed, Congress then decides how those amendments will be ratified, just as it does with any amendments that it proposes. It can choose to have those amendments ratified either by state legislatures, which has been the process used by Congress in every instance except for prohibition, the repeal of prohibition, or it can send it to state ratifying conventions, which are essentially designed to represent the people more fully. Once that proposal is sent out to the state legislative bodies, 3/4 of the states, or 38 states with our current 50-state country, need to ratify before those amendments become part of the Constitution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I see no other questions from the committee members, so we'll